mates were some of the most brutal men I had ever been to sea, and they actually became more well known than the actual captains that they served because of their tactics and with the belaying pin and knuckle dusters. They were really tough characters. But the crew, the mates on the Ocean Monarch, seemed to be a fairly handy bunch. As well as them, there would be the boatswain, whose responsibility it was to look after the sails and the rigging. And the carpenter was a very, very important man on a ship at this time. As well as his obvious duties of looking after the wooden fabric of the boats and the masts and so on, he was responsible for sounding the holds to see if the ship was leaking, for sorting out any leaks if they occurred. He was responsible for doling out the rations, the food rations, to the emigrants. And last, and probably most frighteningly, he was the dentist. A doctor wasn't carried as such, but if a doctor wanted to take passage to America, he was given free passage in return for a letter to say that he would administer his doctoring duties while he was on board the ship. Very few doctors who made the journey ever got off lightly with that deal. And here we see loading time. Most of the cargo at this point would have been taken on board and stowed down below. And these are the people now getting ready to embark. They came from all over Western Europe, a lot from Germany, most from Ireland. It was one of Mackay's later ships, the Thomas Grinnell, that actually carried the Kennedy clan over to America. Here you see loading up in Liverpool. It's difficult to understand really what a big step it was for these people. Many of them from small villages might have never left the place that they were born. A lot of them would never have seen the sea. Probably 90% of them would have never been aboard a boat or a ship of any sort. And practically to an individual, none of them could swim. So it was a huge step. It's difficult to understand what a step. It would be like leaving here tonight and going on the space shuttle tomorrow morning. It was that sort of a step forward. And here we see the crowds on board, more people on the landing stage there, packing on board, ready for the voyage out. And here a scene on the Mersey at that time. The Mersey, as we said, in those days would have been an incredibly busy place, even busier than the 1950s and 60s when it was still a terrific cargo and passenger port. There would have been ships of all sorts moving up and down the river. So on August the 24th, the Ocean Monarch was ready to cast off. With her being alongside, they almost always employed the services of a paddle tug, a steam paddle tug, to take them out either into the middle of the river or down to the mouth of the estuary, depending on the wind and the tide, because they were very big ships to handle in confined waters. And as she moved down the estuary, the pilot would come off the ship, and the low, sort of murky, smoky outline of Liverpool would fade off astern. She would turn the corner out of the Mersey, and there in front of her would be the wide expanse of Liverpool Bay. Ships of all sorts would be there. There'd be other large passenger and cargo ships coming from the other side of the world with all kinds of exotic cargoes on board. There would be these smaller brigs and schooners which would have dealt with trade around the British Isles itself, perhaps bringing slates from Penryn, from Bangor, coal, fishing boats, flats, all sorts. It was a very, very busy bay and busy port. So the Ocean Monarch turned the corner, headed down past the Rhuddlan, and then past the wide open expanse of the mouth of the River Dee with its sandbanks stretching miles out to sea, ready to catch anybody who was trying to cut the corner. The lighthouse at Point of Ayre would be next, and then as she moved on, she would come to the small fishing town of Rhyl. She'd be about 5 miles offshore at this point. And Rhyl was fairly low and indistinct. St Thomas's Church hadn't been built, the Sky Tower wasn't there, the Bloom wasn't there. was just a fishing harbour and a little bit of a ship repair place as well. And it was when she was offshore from Rhyl that the first signs of trouble began to appear. A crewman came up onto the poop deck with a report that smoke was found in the after cabins underneath the poop. Captain Murdoch, a very experienced and able commander, sent a couple of crew back down, went below, and there was indeed a lot of smoke, and it was getting thicker by the minute. They managed to break open a small hole in the deck, but rather than help matters, it increased the draft, and the fire began to take hold. Firefighting on ships at this time was very, very primitive indeed. It consisted basically of buckets. And anybody who's carried a bucket of water on a boat that's rolling about will know that no matter how full it is, very little of that water in the bucket ever reaches where it's going to go. And so the fire started to take hold, and it's now that you remember really what was in the ship. It was a wooden ship. It had been in harbour, so it had dried out. It had 350 mattresses full of dry straw down below. It had 220 crates of pottery, all packed with straw to protect them. So the boat basically was a tinderbox. And as the smoke started to increase, the passengers who had not yet got used to the idea of being on a ship now found out that they were on a ship that was on fire. And for many of them it was just too much to take. On deck as well, just forward of the small cuddy, would be some animals to be used up during the course of the trip, cows and sheep. Well, as soon as they smelled the smoke, they started setting up a commotion. And there's the Ocean Monarch, Enoch train with a big letter T on the topsail, heavily on fire. It was decided to try and bring her up into the wind, which at the time was northwesterly, to try and keep the fire at the stern of the ship, to keep it away from the people. Some people had gone below, already seasick, from fetching them all up on deck, so the deck was now full of people, which hampered any firefighting efforts by the crew. People were running up and down, the animals were making a lot of noise. And so the ship was steadily catching fire. You can see here now in the foreground a sailing yacht. And that's the Queen of the Ocean. It was a chap called Littleton. He was the Commodore of the West Kirby Sailing Club. And he was returning from a regatta up O'Madison in the Menor Straits. And he saw the fire from a long way off and decided to close in, see if he could offer some help. The sea conditions, when you look at these old prints, are always absolutely bloody horrendous. I wouldn't want to be out there in that. But they're a bit dramatic, but it was, by all accounts, quite a rough day, quite a fresh breeze. So it was decided that holding the ship head to wind wasn't going to be very easy at all. So in the end, they dropped the anchors. And by now, the blaze had started to get into the after rigging. You can see here again the Queen of the Oceans here. And there's also a paddle steamer in the distance, the Prince of Wales, which was on a regular run from Liverpool to Bangor. So she started to close in as well. And then the main rescue vessel was the Afonso. She was a Brazilian steam frigate built in the Mersey, and she was out on sea trials. So like the Prince of Wales, she was quite handy in that she had paddle wheels so she could manoeuvre irrespective of what the wind was doing. The other thing, of course, is ships like this had to be very careful where they were because the amount of stuff that was flying off the Ocean Monarch, all it took really was a burning remnant to catching your sails and your ship would be on fire as well. The people had by now all started to crowd further and further forward as the fire swept along below decks and burst through onto the deck. It was driving people further and further forward. The crew started to cut loose any spare spars or any timber work that they could and put it over the side, attached to ropes so it floated along the side. Because as I say, there were no lifeboats as such on these ships. They carried 2 or 3 whalers, which were more really used as utility boats for the crew if the boat was moored in the river. They weren't lifeboats as such. There were no life belts. So there was very little they could do to help these people. The crew of the yacht, Afonso and the Prince of Wales, launched their longboats to try and come to the aid of the people. People were jumping over the side now, absolutely terrified, distraught. And where they caught hold of the spars in the water alongside the ship, these spars, some of them have been 18 inches, 2 feet in diameter, were being thrust up against the side of the ship by the waves. So a lot of people were crushed. You know, it was a terrible, terrible scene. And as the fire gained hold and moved ever further forward, people began to crowd out onto the jib boom and the bowsprit here, the spar that projects beyond the front of the boat. Another scene. There are several scenes like this. You can see the fire. The fire really was so intense, it was melting the lead scuppers, it was melting everything in its path and just roaring through underneath from straw, from mattress to mattress and down into the cargo. And this is perhaps the most well-known picture. The stern of the Afonso is here, and you can see the longboats now that have set off from the ships, closing in to pick people up out of the water. Just another one. And then another ship started to come into view, and this was the New World Ocean Monarch sister ship. She'd left an hour and a half or so later than the Ocean Monarch to head for New York, and Captain Knight bought his ship as close as he dared. I mean, it was a huge ship to manoeuvre, somewhere over 22 sails on it, but he managed to manoeuvre fairly close. And so they launched their longboat to go over and see what they could do to help. And this was a really good move, because aboard that longboat was a fellow called Frederick Jerome. He was on an American ship, but he was a British seaman, and he had, a couple of years before, saved the entire crew of another ship in America by swimming ashore with a length of rope to set up a breaching buoy. He was in the water 2 hours. He was a magnificent swimmer. By this time, most of the Ocean Monarch was ablaze. Most people had got off her, but a group of women remained on the bowsprit, too terrified to jump off. And you look at the outer end there, it's the height of a high diving board. So if you couldn't swim, and you were dressed in 7 or 8 layers of clothing, it would have taken a lot for you to go over the side. So Jerome got alongside, caught hold of the rope, he was hanging over the side, hauled himself on board, made his way out onto the jib boom with a length of rope, and lowered these people one at a time into the waiting boats underneath. By about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody who was going to be saved had been saved, and the ships started to leave the scene. As they did, they were looking, keeping an eye out for people in the water, but by now, there were no people left alive. People were floating here and there. At this point, a pilot boat from the River Dee came along, and it's a rather sad episode in that they concentrated not on picking people up, but on picking possessions up, picking up trunks and baggage and stuff they thought was valuable, and they were arrested later for that episode. So the Prince of Wales carried on to Bangor. The Alfonso went back into Liverpool. She got the bulk of the survivors on board. Thomas Littleton's yacht carried on to West Kirby. And the New World, after transferring the people from their longboats onto the ships going back to Liverpool, continued her journey to America. And so the Ocean Monarch burned really down to the waterline. And she sank approximately 1 o'clock the next morning. By that time it was as though she'd been cut off neatly a couple of feet above the waterline. She just burned out completely. Wreckage and bodies were washed ashore for days, weeks, even months later, all around the Irish Sea, from Anglesey up to Blackpool and across to the Isle of Man and Ireland, together with possession. The one major piece of the wreck that came off was the figurehead, the 7-foot figure of Neptune, It was washed ashore at Ross-on-Sea and was kept in a garden there until fairly recently as a garden ornament. And so the waters closed over the Ocean Monarch, an inquiry was held. It was never really established how the fire started. The rumours were that a crewman had gone below with a lighted candle to look for stuff and had left the candle below. Somebody else said it was passengers who mistook a ventilator for a chimney and lit a fire. Or it was passengers smoking pipes, something that was expressly forbidden below decks. Medals were bestowed on the captain of the Alfonso, captain and queen of the Ocean, Prince of Wales. The captain of the New World refused to accept a medal. Frederick Jerome had a medal, a gold medal, and he also received the freedom of the city of New York for his life-saving efforts. But the waters eventually closed over the Ocean Monarch, and that was that. Excuse me a moment. 24th of August 1848. So we jump forward now, 130 years. At that time, it's me in the middle, in case you don't recognise me, changed a bit. In 1979, I used to go to the Marina service station down the west end of Rhyl. On a Friday and a Saturday evening, they had an air compressor that was used for filling diving cylinders. So Mrs. Spiller asked me if I would run the compressor and fill any cylinders that actually came into the shop. And this I did. It used to take a couple of hours a night to fill the cylinders. And for this, I used to receive £5 worth of petrol at the pump. £5 worth of petrol now would just about get me home to the Greenbury Road, but in those days it ran the car for nearly a week, so it wasn't too bad a deal, and you got to meet quite a lot of divers. And one of the divers who used to come in there regular was this fella here, John Pover. Everybody knows John Pover. And he came in on the Friday nights, and you can always remember him. "Hello, Mr. Robbo." He said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" So I said, "Why?" He said, "I've been out with a party today and I was looking for a fastener." Fasteners are names given to obstructions on the seabed that normally trawlers do their very best to avoid. It messes the nets up. He said, "We're looking for a fastener. I think I've found it." He said, "We're catching a lot of pouting, which you only get on wrecks, basically." He said, "But I've got the anchor stuck, so I've buoyed it, and I'm going to go out tomorrow with the gear and go down and have a look." He said, "Do you fancy coming?" Well, the day out with John Pover was something you didn't miss. It was whatever happened, how successful or unsuccessful was it, was a damn good day out. So 9 o'clock the next morning we set off, and we went out to the wreck of the Ocean Monarch. We didn't know it was the Ocean Monarch. In those days, of course, 1979, there was no GPS, which you've got in a little box or even on your watch or whatever nowadays. Decker was a large outfit that commercial trawlers had. So to find a position out at sea, you used to use transits. When you were in a position you wanted to go back to, you would look ashore, and we were quite lucky here really, and then we got quite a distinct shoreline all the way around, backed by a lot of hills. And what you would do is you would line something on the shore, St Thomas's Church, with the second tree from the right on Cup Mountain, and that gave you one line, and then you look over there, and you line up something into Llandudno with the mountain that drops above Penaclick Tunnel, or a particular pylon on the top and back of the subsequent pass. And where those two lines crossed, assuming the bits you looked at didn't move, you had to be in the right position. And John Pover was an absolute expert at doing this. I've seen him get to within half a boat's length of where he wanted to be, 12 miles out to sea, using transit. It never failed. The only problem you had generally was that in very, very good weather, the visibility used to go. So the sea was flat, you couldn't really see anything. Anyway, we went out, and it was one of those perfect days, absolutely glass calm. On the way out, you could look down and see down into the water a long way. And this was an entry in my logbook from that day. John Pover, unknown wreck, 30 minutes, 16 metres, calm, sunny. And a few details there. For some reason I've written down that I thought it was an iron wreck. because of a lot of ironwork sticking up in the wreck. I'll let you read that for a minute. We were on the Wendy Sue, which was John's cabin cruiser fishing boat, and he had a party of 6 anglers, and he had a young fella on there called Phil Tye, and he was a typical Pover crew lad. Pover recruited a lot of youngsters around the harbour, trained them, and in later years when he went for jobs at sea, all you had to tell the boss really was that you were one of Pover's lads and the job was yours. Phil, the last time I spoke to Phil, he was the skipper of a salvage barge out in the Philippines. So he made it good. He was only a youngster when this. So we got to the wreck, picked the boy up, put it on board. John and Phil made sure the anglers were quite happy catching fish, and we kitted up with the diving gear. Now, you can see the Wendy Sue. Good feature of the Wendy Sue was at the stern. It had 2 doors that opened out, and the deck then was level with the water, which is very handy for diving. You can see somebody actually diving out the back of the boat there. Look at the boats in Rhyl Harbour in those days. I've got a picture at home in 1966. There were 93 boats between Bottom Ferry and the bridge. I think there's 3 at the moment over the bridge. And it was all sand then. When the tide went out, the bank's in the middle of the river, you could get out of your boat and you could have a picnic on the sand. You wouldn't want to have a picnic there now. Anyway, once the anglers were happy, we went over the side, looked down, and you could see down probably 40 to 50 feet that day. It was an incredible visibility. The anchor rope was stretching away, bleached white, and you could see in amongst the lighter sand on the seabed, even 50 feet, 60 feet deep, you could see a large black mass in the middle. So it's quite a feeling when you go down and there's something there and you can't really wait to get to the bottom of the line. And when we got to the bottom of the line, we found this great jumble of a wreck. It's sticking up thousands and thousands of fish. Again, this is an artist's impression. I use the word artist very and almost straight away, what we couldn't quite grasp as we were moving up towards the wreck were these great corrugated hoses all over the ship. Initially we thought they were the bottom lines of trawl nets, because they cut big lumps of rubber out of old tyres and make like a big roller, like on the lawnmower, to the bottom of the net so it scoops the fish in. But they were too big and there were too many of them. And it wasn't until we got up to the wreck itself and got close to them that we found out there were thousands and thousands of plates. They'd all been packed in crates. The straw, to some extent, had burnt away, and where the crates had fallen apart and they'd settled onto the heavier, more solid parts of the ships, and so they were waving about over the bottom of the ship. Just thousands and thousands of earthenware plates. The whole wreck was full of fish. Every hole had a very large conger eel, heads the size of Labradors' heads. Lobsters, big lobsters. There was a lobster at one end of the wreck, and after we dived it quite often with the diving club, they christened this lobster Eric. I don't know why Eric. But the general legend was that Eric was so big that he had JCB written on one. Anyway, we picked a few plates up and a few bits and pieces and decided this wreck needed quite a bit more sort of exploration. Later that week, when I was in work, John went back out to the wreck with a couple of characters. John Spiller, John Spiller's son, and a lad from Rhuddlan Sea, Steve Cryer. They dived on the wreck, brought up a stack of plates, and these are the plates you can see here. And John, being John and liking publicity, got the picture put in the Daily Post. And he got home that night to find the phone ringing, and it was the receiver of wreck from Moskin Docks. Asking why he had brought all this stuff ashore without notifying him, and he would be down in the morning to inspect and catalogue it. So he came down, gave John a bollocking, and I told John they must report every item they brought ashore in future. So the next day, John rang him up and he said, we've got some stuff here if you want to come over. So he came over from Moston. John took him on board and he opened the crate and there was a plate in the bottom of the crate. So he catalogued it and he went back to Moston, and then the next day John phoned him up and he said, we've got some more stuff here. So he came over and this time John had got a broken plate. And the receiver so lost interest by the end of the week and never bothered again. It's quite different nowadays in that if you were doing that sort of thing now, you would be home drawn and quartered. So they were happy days. We dived quite regular with the diving club from Rhyl because it was a nice wreck. It wasn't very deep. If you timed it right, there wasn't a huge amount of current, and everybody could come up with a small memento of their dive. It was a very popular dive site. But as time went on, rumours started to go around that there was more valuable stuff in the wreck than plates. And a group from Chester came to start with, and they used some explosives on it, which for marine life is absolutely catastrophic, because the pressure waves set up by explosives kill thousands and thousands of fish. And then after they left, another group from Liverpool called Best Speed turned up. Best Speed had already been to the Royal Charter at Moorville, and a guy who I knew who'd salvaged the Royal Charter for probably 35, 40 years, a fellow called Jack Leyland Smart, was elbowed off the site even though he was registered as the salver in possession, and they took over. And they told all the local people in shops and garages and so on that they were going to get the gold and they would be in for a share of the money if they supplied them with cheap fuel and cheap food. No, nobody ever got any return on it, so they left there. And they came to Rhyl and anchored a big ship, a big trawler, the Scott's name, can't remember now. Anchored that over it, stopped everybody else going down. I mean, it was a regular place for the fishing boats from Rhyl to go catching fish, but they stopped everybody going there. We had a couple of run-ins with them at the harbour, but we were a bit fitter and tougher in that day, so we told her wrong. Anyway, they disappeared after a while, and the wreck was left in peace. This is a commemorative stone in Abergele churchyard. This is one that was replaced in 2006. This is the replacement that was put there in 2016 to commemorate several people who were washed ashore and buried in Abergele churchyard. So the wreck's still there. The gentleman sat here in the front has dived it many times, filmed it, got film of it. And the wrecks don't always stay quite the same. The wreck is still in the same place, but the sand comes and goes. So you never know each time. You can dive it every day for 3 months and see a certain amount, and then the next time you dive it, the sand has shifted and uncovered a part of the wreck that was buried before, and there might be anything sitting there on the seabed waiting to be picked up. So, you know, no matter how much you go out there, still a very interesting wreck site. In total, 178 people lost their lives on the Ocean Monarch. So it was the second greatest loss of life anywhere off the coast of Wales. Can anybody remember this fella from the talk I do on the lifeboat? William Fowkes. He was a crewman on the first lifeboat in Rhyl, and he was a fisherman before that, and the rumour was that Mr. Fowkes lived under the pier. But Rhyl didn't live in a house, he lived under the pier, and when he died, he was found dead under the pier. Whether they buried him under the pier, I don't know. But he is reputed to have picked quite a bit of stuff up off the Ocean Monarch when it was floating, and apparently he would show people his artefacts if they were interested. So it kind of knits him in a little bit to the history of the Rhyl lifeboat, and it's possibly one of the reasons a lifeboat was put at Rhyl, because of the amount of traffic passing to and from Liverpool and the loss of life on the Ocean Monarch. So there we are, the sun setting over the wind farm. They didn't think in 1848 that wind would still be playing quite an important part in what went on at sea off Rhyl. And so that is it. If anybody has got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I've got over here some plates. If you would look at the plates, we don't read them up because they are incredibly brittle. The salt gets inside them. And then this. This is a porthole. This would have been either in the front of the poop deck, in the after side of the forecastle where the crew were, or in one of the deck houses where the people like the boatswain and the carpenter live. This would have been inside the cabin, and that would have been the opening light that swung open. And then on the outside is a sliding deck light, which would have been shut in bad weather to protect the glass from water pressure and so on. But you can see the effects of the fire. This isn't corrosion, this is actually melted. You know, it's sort of inferno conditions. So you can pick that up. I'll put the string back through it because somebody picked it up one day and the dead light dropped out and kissed it toe by inch. So you can pick that up and play with it if you want. But, okay, any questions? Yeah?
When you first dived the wreck, did you know that it was the Ocean Monarch?
No, that came later on. What you did, you looked at the size and what it was carrying, and then you started checking through sort of cargo manifests of ships that have been lost. There's all sorts of stuff out there. I mean, you've got First World War wrecks, Second World War wrecks, slate wrecks, which are just basically huge piles of slate because the ship has dissolved and gone away a long time ago. You've got stuff off Liverpool like the old anti-aircraft forts, big huge concrete structures on legs that had searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. And they just demolished them after the war. They're all still lying on the bottom, surrounded by absolute mountains of jam jars. Must have eaten a hell of a lot of jam when they were stationed out on those.
What's the law now regarding bringing stuff from the ship?
It's very complicated. It's very much tougher now than it used to be. That's like everything else. The fun has gone out of it now. If you had stuff like this a few years ago, there was an amnesty and you could declare it and catalogue it.
Do they claim anything like they do with the archaeology on land?
We tried at one point, when we heard other people were going to come along and start trying to blast and tunnel their way into the wreck, we did apply to see if it could be made a protected wreck. But they said that they weren't interested really, that ships from that era were very well documented and so it wouldn't qualify. The Resurgam is out there, the old submarine, that is a protected wreck.
Yeah. Is there an element of sadness that you're seeing aside with all those deaths? Do you ever feel that as you're diving?
You do, but at the same time, if you didn't dive it and explore it, nobody would have known the story. You know, I mean, I dived a lot of the stuff in Scapa Flow and places like that. Yeah. You know, and some of the stuff up there, like the German wrecks that are there were very, very, very few people left on them because they were scuttled. Yes. But the rules up there now are extremely strict about bringing anything up. But a party of divers with the chap we used to dive with, we used to hire his trawler to go diving. A party of the divers who were there last year saw on one of the battleships an ornamental regimental bugle, perfectly preserved, lying on the bottom in the mud. And they applied, the chap we used to dive with, a fellow called John Thornton, applied to Scottish Heritage to lift it. Do it properly, to photograph it first, record where it was in the wreck, but to lift it very, very carefully, bring it ashore, and he offered to pay for the conservation of it, which would have been a fair bit of money, so that it could have been presented to the museum in Stromness. And he got a one-word answer from Scottish Heritage, and that was no. So the divers who were with him when they found it were up the next week, so he suggested that they go down and take some proper photographs of it, posterity, you know, since it can be born. And when they went down, the bulkhead had collapsed on top of it. So that is lost now forever. It will never get, it could have been a magnificent exhibit, you know, in the museum. And that's the point really. It is sad to pick stuff up from what is possibly engraved, but at the same time, it's what gives people the knowledge of what happened there, you know.
Did this disaster lead to any improvement in safety at sea, by any chance?
Not especially, no.
I wasn't expecting you to say yes.
I mean,
There are too many of them, weren't there?
well, there were, yeah. I mean, you had stuff like Samuel Plimsoll. He was later on, he got involved in the safe loading levels for ships. And it's interesting to see, if you look at an example of the loading levels on the ships, there are lots of different levels. And there's fresh, tropical fish, sea, tropical sea. And the lightest load line, the lowest one, the one you loaded your ship, the lightest for crossing, was WNA, Winter North Atlantic. And that held true throughout the world. Anywhere in the world, Winter North Atlantic was reckoned to be the place you didn't want to be with a heavy ship. So they were only loading very lightly for those conditions. Mackay went on to build, well, he built Flying Cloud in 1851. He built in total about 70 ships in the space of 25 years, which is a phenomenal amount of wood at the start. But his ships, he was credited as being the inventor really of the clipper ship. His first real clipper was Staghound in 1850, and she just wiped the floor with everything else that was on the sea. She was an extreme clipper, where sailing ships at that time had fairly bulbous bows. The bows on Staghound were like a modern destroyer. They were knife sharp, and she could travel at tremendous speed. Some of his ships, the Lightning and the Flying Cloud, still hold records today for the longest run in 24 hours by a wooden sailing ship. Somewhere around about, I think Lightning was 434 miles in 24 hours, which is an average of about 18 knots or 20 miles an hour, which is a tremendous feat for a sailing ship.
Was the Monarch carrying, get the name of it, shale in the right at the bottom of the ship?
If it was lightly loaded, they carried on this occasion they carried railroad iron. There's 600 tons of railroad iron, which gave a bump. Because emigrants, by and large, were a very light cargo compared to what they normally carry.
Yes.
You know, they're very.
But they could transfer the ballast side to side. They couldn't transfer rail, could they?
No. Once the ballast was in those days, it was in. That was it.
Yeah.
Were the plates made at one of the Liverpool potteries?
Sorry?
Were the plates?
The slates were made by a company called Pompey Walker and Company from Staffordshire, and they were eventually taken over by Wedgwood. So they're quite a nice plate. They came in about 5 or 6 different sizes. I've got this one now. It has got Pompey Walker Korean written on the back.
Oh, yes.
But there were literally thousands and thousands and thousands of these. Do you ever see any?
Yeah, you still find little bits of them, yeah.
Bits of them, yeah.
There's no full place for them.
No. No, they were nice. As I say, the problem is if they craze at all, the salt gets into them. And you might pick this up 20 times, and the 21st time you pick it up, it just falls to bits in your hand, you know, so you can spray them with stuff to preserve them. But,
Were they that colour or were they blue?
no, this colour. There were several different patterns. There were some plainer ones with just a blue bording, you know. But, those were the sort of bulk of the car. But as I say, all packed in straw, in wooden crates, so that was going to go up. You know, and then all the mattresses as well. The ship had been in harbour for several days, so she dried out. So it was literally a tinder box waiting to.
What happened to the captain?
He was hailed in there. His record was not affected at all. Went back to sea. Yeah.
to them.
Sorry?
Eventually, I wonder if any of the people who were rescued eventually went
to America. I don't know. I think so. I mean, they decided to go because there was no future here.
No future here.
You know, and I don't think they. I don't think anybody, whether it was the ship owners or the captains or anybody, thought that, you know, 100 years later, people would still be getting on the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth to do the same thing. You know, they thought the Ocean Monarch was safe, but the premier ship, owned by a premier line, some of the largest at the time, you know, what could be better than to be on that ship to go to America? But 100 years later, they were still queuing up to go over there, so it must be good over there or something. Okay. All right.
Nobody seasick? Peter? Fantastic. Thank you very much. As Peter was talking, he mentioned, even before he did the comparison, 17 or 18 knots, and I thought, well, that's all you can do on the road these days. But as always, very interesting. Everybody enjoys it. We've had a good crowd in tonight.
If anybody got any more questions, we'll be...
Even though several are on holiday, and I believe there's a St David's Day dinner in St Asaph or something, and you know, we did wonder how many we'd get, but when they knew it was you, they can't keep them away, you see.
And cheap.
Eh?
And cheap.
Our speaker's fee tonight is donated to the RNLI, and as I said, at the back on the left, the lady at the table will be more than happy to take your money. And I did notice, well, I thought I noticed an RNLI collecting box somewhere. Did you? That's over there as well. So if you've got any spare pennies, you know where it can go tonight. So don't forget, that car park ain't free after tonight. You'll need, I think you get an hour free, but you need to pay for the other one, which used to be 50p. I don't know what it'll be, because I think the council are putting the car parking charges up as well. Anyway, Ash, thank you. Right. Don't forget, we're running a competition this year. At the moment, it's only open to members for photographs for the 2025 calendar. So if you've got something at home that we haven't seen before, you think might be of interest, bring it along. Likewise, if you've got any memorabilia of subjects about Rhuddlan, and you're prepared to loan them to the society, then we do have the display cabinets in the library, and we'd like to fill them. But it gets ever more difficult, as it does, to find speakers. So again, if you know, or if you've got a subject that you're interested in, and you know of a speaker, then please let us know. It gets ever more difficult to find speakers. You can't always find a Peter Robinson. So after that, 15th of March, we have another History Day in the library, and this time we're going to have a competition, which Stephen has put together. It'll be photographs of Rhuddlan, but questions about the photographs, so something different. 15th of March, we kick off at 10 o'clock, and there will be the usual bits and pieces there as well. My appeal for committee members: 2 brave souls came to the last committee meeting, and both enjoyed it. So thank you to them, but it doesn't let the rest of you off the hook. Next month, April the 5th, we welcome Michael Blackburn, who's been to speak to us on several occasions before, and his subject will be a changing coastline, North Wales to the North Wirral. So that's next month. I think that brings you up to date. Now we have the grand draw. And Hayden, over to you.